Welcome to Sovereign Radio, our short-form podcast series created for the Modular Summit. I'm here with Ismail. Welcome.
Hey, thank you. I'm Ismail Khoffi, co-founder and CTO of Celestia Labs. And I've been working on that project for almost 4 years now.
So we're here in Paris. I am curious to hear, how has your experience been so far this week?
The week has been rather quiet for me in the sense that I did not attend many other events, and I only met with the team and with a few people. Otherwise, I was preparing slides and
getting
have been
ready
working.
For this.
Yeah, getting ready for this and also getting ready for launch.
Nice. Yeah, so we're recording this on the first day of the Modular Summit. It has just started, but I am curious, what are your impressions of it so far?
It's amazing. I mean, the venue is amazing. The organization is amazing. We have a bunch of really interesting speakers. Like when I looked at the agenda, I was like, oh, I really want to listen to all of these talks.
Nice.
Like usually I just like, I want to listen to like a few talks, but this time is like the agenda is really packed with interesting things.
Yeah, actually, I mean, the ZK Validator, one of my companies, we're actually organizing the ZK track today. So
Awesome.
I'll be there. I'm excited for that. Okay, I think it would be great for us to start talking a little bit about Celestia. Celestia is one of the teams that actually co-produced the Modular Summit and the Sovereign Radio. But I mean, more primarily, it's a blockchain project. Tell us a little bit about what it is.
Celestia at its core is the most minimalistic layer one that you can imagine. It decouples, so it's like a general purpose chain that decouples execution from consensus and data availability. So the core idea is that applications, decentralized applications, only post their data onto Celestia. So it gets ordered and it gets the guarantee that the data is published to the network. And other than that, Celestia doesn't do anything else.
Yeah.
And like all the applications, the business logic run on rollups or on a layer above their Celestia.
So you just mentioned rollups, and I think a lot of our viewers are probably familiar with rollups, but I think they're familiar of, like, they know the infrastructure in the Ethereum context. So what's different here?
It's very similar. The main difference to Ethereum is that we do not have an enshrined settlement layer.
What does that mean?
A settlement layer is a specific execution layer that can be used for bridging between rollups.
Like the assets. Is that what you mean? Like the actual tokens?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So you don't have, like, there will be never like a rollup that will like send a token to Celestia and then it will be sent. Like the tokens don't live on Celestia.
I mean, I wouldn't say never, but like the current configuration, the current way we're launching it, there's no general purpose execution environment on Celestia. So there's currently no way to bridge in and out from and to Celestia directly, right? Like it will be used through, it will be possible through third parties like chains via IBC. You could swap out the tier token to a different chain and then to a rollup. And rollups can talk to each other as well, but like there's no direct way. Mustafa actually proposed a very interesting way to do bridging from and to Celestia without enshrining a settlement layer, which uses ZK snarks.
Interesting.
Might be, very good. It could be an own episode.
But wait, I want to understand this. So like the execution layer is where you'd also like deploy applications and things like this. So you're saying like Celestia won't have that. There's no applications directly, or like there's no generalized applications. What can, like, at the same time, I'm assuming developers will interact with it somehow. So what are they doing with the base chain? Are they just deploying rollups?
I mean, let's put aside like all the proof of stake logic, and what developers will care most about is basically one transaction type, which is pay for blobs. So they submit when a rollup or like some other layer submits data to Celestia, they do so via triggering a transaction type, which is called pay for blob, and that's about it. And they also run a light node, so it does. They do data availability sampling.
We should actually maybe make a distinction here. So when the question I actually had was more like the rollup developers. So like a rollup developer, how do they even like create a rollup to lock into Celestia? Especially going back to those original ideas of rollups. Like rollups are a collection of smart contracts often. So if you can't deploy that, what are you deploying on Celestia?
So on Celestia directly, you do not deploy anything. It's more that there will be infrastructure on top, which allows developers to easily deploy rollups, which could also be smart contracts, like in the Ethereum case. But they're
specific, maybe.
Yeah, there could be like very different ways to, and we're already seeing this. There's different service providers where you can like have one-click solutions. You write your program, for instance, in Solidity, and then you deploy. And in the background, what's happening? You use a shared sequencer, or you spin up your own sequencer, or you directly post data, like as a base rollup. You directly post data to Celestia. So it's like different ways to interact, and it's very nuanced in my opinion. But like it's very if developers are given the choices directly, they will have to choose from very different set of configurations and trade-offs. But luckily, there are companies and projects working on simplifying this, such that developers can very easily interact with Celestia by abstracting it away, essentially.
I think I'm realizing that I've been sort of thinking about rollups on Celestia wrong, maybe. So the way I always think about them, obviously, having looked mostly at the Ethereum case, is that like to deploy a rollup, you're talking about months and months of work, and maybe less now because the libraries are built. But originally it was like you had to build these things from scratch. You have to kind of build a space for other users and other developers to be able to use your execution environment, and then you'd create that connection point and then you deploy it. But what you just said makes me think like actually the dApp producer, like the dApp developer, the one who's just creating an application that users could use, is creating a very fast rollup that then hosts its
business
single app.
Yes.
Okay, this is it's like I've heard sort of talk of that, but I hadn't realized that is actually what you're imagining. So when you think of rollups, you're not thinking of like a single L1 with like maybe 4 rollups that then have execution environments. You're thinking of like hundreds or maybe more little application rollups.
Exactly. I mean, both. So there's both, right? Like there's these rollups, like Optimism. There's there's currently deployed OpStack on top of Rollkit, which posts data to Celestia directly. So there you can deploy smart contracts, but there will also be application-specific rollups. And I mean, the vision that I think we will see play out more and more in the future is more these application-specific rollups.
That's so interesting. But I mean, kind of going back to that idea, like the data availability layer, the sort of thing that Celestia is doing, do those rollups need to also connect to any other chain to be able to exist in space? If you know what I mean? Like, right now, it sounds like you could create an application, it will live on that rollup, but how does it like touch anything else?
I mean, again, there will be different ways, right? Like there will be sovereign rollups, which will be their own chain, essentially, that directly post data to Celestia. You can imagine like a Cosmos SDK app built on top of Rollkit, and then you have your own chain. But there also will be, as I said, there will be also like settlement hubs, also rollups on top of Celestia that will fulfill the function that the settlement layer has on Ethereum as well, such that applications that are using that settlement layer can bridge directly, right? Like they can touch or interact with other rollups in its own kind of ecosystem very like seamlessly and interoperate very seamlessly. The sovereign rollups will, if they're using a committee, can use IBC. If they're not, they will have to use like some multisig or like some other provider. There's a bunch of bridging providers that are currently working on how to bridge between this heterogeneous set of rollups.
It's almost like, so in the Ethereum case, you see so much of like EVM and then EVM compatible, like EVM rollups. But here it's like you've taken the different pieces of that underlying blockchain and then sort of sliced it. And so Celestia is the DA, but then you'll have another one that's settlement. And I don't know, is there anything else that you would need?
I mean, you can have general purpose execution environments on top to have people deploy their smart contracts as they used to. But I mean, and on that, you could again have a different layer, right? You can deploy a settlement contract for a layer on top as well. But I think what we will see is rather Celestia, several settlement hubs and then a lot of application-specific rollups. And these settlement hubs will kind of have their own ecosystems as well.
It's like, as you describe this, I can't help but remember, like, or think about the Cosmos sort of model as well, which is like, there is no central kind of point of truth. There's like lots of blockchains that are connected through IBC. Here you're sort of slicing the blockchain differently. Mm-hmm. So it's like, there's different groups that will have parts of proof of what's happening. And do you actually imagine something like a DA layer, an execution layer, a settlement layer being sort of connected? Would you almost have like a group which tends to work together? Or do you imagine these groups like independently working with very different partners? Like almost branching. I don't know if I'm doing a good image there, but
I think there will be like clusters of chains interacting like with each other essentially. So there will also be like the other ecosystems obviously will continue to exist as well, right? Like so there will be a larger blockchain ecosystem where rollups talk to each other, and other ecosystems that are not using Celestia also talk with Celestia or Celestia rollups.
Cool. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about those other projects? Like, are these like if someone's using Rollkit creating a settlement layer as their thing, is this a partner? Are you doing this also in-house, or would you I'm just kind of curious, like, is Celestia purely focused on the DA, or does it help with the other stuff? Because it's a very like distinct vision that I guess you need to kind of champion a little bit.
Yeah, when we started, there was no roll-up framework whatsoever, right?
Okay.
Like so we had to build one at least, or start one in-house. Today there's many options. There's like Sovereign SDK, there's OpStack, but when we started there was nothing. So we started building Rollkit, what is called Rollkit today. Back then it was called Optimint, because basically what it is, it takes all the abstractions that Tendermint provides, but it strips away the consensus. So it's like an ABCI app. You can build ABCI apps as you're used to with the Cosmos SDK, or if you're familiar with ABCI, you can like continue using exactly the same paradigm. But under the hood, it uses Celestia for data availability. So that we built in-house. We recently, it's on purpose that it has its own branding and its own GitHub organization, because we want to be as neutral as possible. And eventually, this might be spun out and built by a different project or team.
Let's talk about data availability and why. Like you kind of mentioned, you strip out consensus, so it's also doing consensus. Like for the blockchain, for the whole kind of ecosystem.
Celestia, yes.
Celestia, yeah. But like, what's the connection then of consensus and data availability? I've actually been a little bit confused about that, because I'm like, why don't you just say consensus then?
Yeah. Well,
is it only like a flavor of consensus that you're doing?
I mean, you could argue that like any layer one provides data availability, right? Like
automatically
built in. But what we mean by data availability layer is you somehow guarantee that the data was published, right? How it usually works in other chains is like full nodes download the data and ensure that it is published by doing this. And in Celestia's case, there's like this technique called erasure coding employed, which makes it possible that nodes can sample like small chunks, and with that ensure that the whole block has been published. Such that like these rollups, these application-specific rollups, can only download the portion of the data that they care about. So they don't have to download the whole block, as it's like usually if you verify layer one, you have to they have to download.
Have all of it.
Exactly.
Are these light clients? Would you call what these nodes are sort of like client-like, except that they do the sampling?
Yeah, I mean they are classical Tendermint-like clients essentially that are augmented by the functionality of doing like they additionally do data availability sampling, and with that gain like probabilistic, almost 100% certainty that the whole block has been published.
You mentioned earlier this like the developer creating the roll up would like put a blob. Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
So is that sort of the equivalent of what the EVM, sort of the ZK rollups on the Ethereum case are like posting to chain? just whatever that is, or is it different?
I mean, there's also two roughly, without going into detail, but like roughly two configurations how ZK rollups work. Like there's this Validium method that only posts the like proofs onto Ethereum and the data to a data availability committee or to some data layer.
Yeah.
So Celestia is more like the data availability committee, but as a proof of stake chain.
But do you imagine, like with Rollkit, are the types of rollups being created ZK rollups?
They could be.
Okay.
I think.
But where then does the proofs go? Would you need a separate environment to post the proofs if there were ZK rollups?
If there were ZK rollups, and you would need.
And it was we're saying not the Validium type, but the other type of rollup.
Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of depends because, like, if the ZK rollups use a settlement layer, they would post their proofs on the settlement layer. If they're not, the proofs could also be like dispersed on the peer-to-peer layer or amongst full nodes, or amongst light clients as well. So it like kind of depends again.
Okay. When you mentioned though, I want to go back to the light client topic. So who runs is it the rollups themselves? Is there like a light client on the rollup, or is there a light client on the Celestia side? For the rollup.
For the rollup, yeah, that's only on the rollup. Celestia does not run the rollup light client.
Got it.
Celestia just runs like the consensus, and it's the rollup sequencers or the rollup infrastructure to ensure that the data has been posted to Celestia. They run a Celestia light client essentially.
That's doing sampling.
Exactly. That's doing sampling, and also you verify the commitment to the data on Celestia. That's why you need the header as well, and the data availability header. The way we implement Rollkit is also more general. Like we're not implementing it that it can only be used with Celestia. It's also general purpose. I think the Rollkit team not too long ago was the first team that used Bitcoin as for data availability essentially.
So how do they do that though?
The very basic idea is there was an upgrade to Bitcoin that made it cheaper to post data directly to Bitcoin.
Okay.
And then instead of using Celestia as a data availability layer, they use Bitcoin as a data availability layer using Rollkit and post the blocks directly to Bitcoin. Without sampling, but like you have to download the whole block and everything. Like it doesn't have all the benefits, but still is more general purpose. And
That's cool. I actually want to ask you about that because like working right now in the space, like you're creating open source software, Rollkit, the example you just gave is not even for a Celestia case, but how do you approach that? Like, are you trying to also just like create a little bit more of like the vision? You have to create the tools to be able to work with your system, but those tools could also could be used with other systems, and you're cool with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's important that it's not called modularism, not maximalism as a meme only. It's what we believe in, and I think we need this infrastructure is necessary anyways. And if other teams use it or fork it and modify it, I think it will benefit everyone anyways.
Nice. I know that your background had been a bit more in Cosmos, and you sort of like hinted at IBC stuff. Everything we've described, I think, still lives primarily within like the Celestia world, but how are you seeing bridging or any sort of connection point to other networks?
I think initially we'll mostly, for the Celestia ecosystem, we mostly see like more like XLR-like systems or like multi-sigs bridging between rollups, just because
it's there.
It's like will be immediately available.
And you did say when you said the execution layer as potentially a rollup, would you have a rollup that acts as like the swap spot something?
Could be.
You could have like a DEX rollup.
Yes.
Or a bridge rollup.
Yeah. So it could be. It would make sense to mix this with like a settlement hub, right? Like you have a market maker, you have a DEX, and a settlement hub.
I see. So those are two different things. The settlement hub is just to like take note of what is out there, then but you do some sort of like bridge rollup.
Yeah.
But then you also mentioned like Axel they have their own validator set. Do each of these rollups, are they supposed to have validator sets too?
The rollups, they don't have to. They could. It doesn't make sense for them to have like a huge validator set with doing its own consensus, because you can use the Celestia one, right?
Yeah.
But they could. I think the rollups most likely will be like a committee that is, but it is not trusted necessarily, right? Like it could be trust minimized in the sense that committee is not relied on for state validity.
Do you notice that there's all these ecosystems that seem to be converging
Yes.
on
And I love it.
as you describe this, I think about the Cosmos Hub's move for like shared security. I mean, or Ethereum and rollups, but it's that idea that you start to like share the validator set at the bottom, like in the center, and that security that it can garner is then used by these other like things, applications, or do you see it as quite different?
I mean, for Celestia, it's quite different, right? Like the validator set of Celestia does not need to have overlap with like the sequencers or validators of rollups, right? It's different than interchain security with this regard. Like what like interchain security guarantees is more similar to what Polkadot does in some sense, because basically the validator set of the main chain is shared across other chains.
Actually validating the other stuff.
Also the state. It has to execute the transactions, right?
Okay.
And that's quite different in Celestia, because like here you just get the guarantee data has been ordered and published, right? Like that's quite different. And the guarantee that the execution is actually valid happens on the layer above again.
So then would you also say then like Ethereum, Cosmos Hub, and Polkadot are all sort of, because they're all validating execution, like they're validating those three things that we had talked about. Settlement.
Well, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, in Ethereum it's more, it is a bit more lightweight in the sense that it can be used as a settlement layer, and then the settlement layer only validates the proofs or certain like disputes. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be the case that the Ethereum validator set, has to validate actively the whole chain of the rollups on top of Ethereum, which is the case in interchain security and somewhat the case in Polkadot, where it's only a subset, right? Like they get like randomly chosen to validate the parachain.
I want to talk a little bit about the Celestia validator world, because I'm going to say the ZK validator is the validator, is going to be a validator on Celestia.
Awesome.
But yeah, tell me a little bit about what that's like to put together. I don't know how much you were part of that. I know often there's like a team that's dedicated, but yeah, tell me a bit about bringing together that community. Who are the validators?
To like bootstrap that community, we launched a lot of testnets, right? Like early from DevNet, I think it's like almost 2 years ago already. The first testnet DevNet, which we opened to the public, that started basically that early community. And then I think what will direct the mainnet validator set will be the last one, which is the incentivized testnet called Block Space Race. So basically the winners of the block space race will be the validators in the Genesis file, so to say.
Is this the one that just happened?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, we actually arranged in that.
Yeah. Awesome.
Nice.
And then, I mean, it's a public network, so it's unclear how it will develop, but that's the initial set.
Cool. Okay, I think we should kind of continue on that sort of thread of the roadmap and like what's coming. So we've talked a bit about validators, but there's probably so much more. Like, what is it to launch Celestia? What is the launch process? Because you're getting close.
Yeah, we're getting pretty close.
Will it be 2023?
Yes.
Okay.
I hope so.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
So
we're
doing this in July, so you still have quite a few months. But
yeah.
Okay. So tell me, what's ahead, or what's like short term ahead? What are the next steps? You have the validator set somewhat defined. What do you still need to do? I
mean, there's still bug fixes. Like what we're doing with the so Celestia has this like separation of the consensus and the data network as well, right? Like that's also two teams working, and their software is also two different repositories, and one team is doing an internal audit as well as like an external audit. So there's like bugs bubbling up and need to be fixed. And the node software itself, we're not doing an external audit, but we're finishing, because this has not been done before, like there's no other project doing data availability sampling, we're gonna launch like a minimal viable version of that, basically, right? It will have data availability sampling working, block sync, and bad encoding fraud proofs and block reconstruction. So that is like, we're basically finishing the last 5% of that.
Wow.
And once that's ready, we're gonna launch, basically.
Okay.
And yeah.
Is this the first time you launch a blockchain?
No, I've been part of the team that launched the Cosmos Hub.
Cool.
And
that was that was one of the first. It wasn't the first, but I know it was one of the first proof of stake networks, and it was also one of the first to do maybe it was the first to do the incentivized testnet model.
Yes, I think Zaki introduced that. What was it called? Game of Zones back then, right? It's very it makes a lot of sense for me to do like incentivized testnets, and I think like what's being copied now in the whole space.
So you do have some sense of what to expect. Yes. In terms of like how things roll out.
Yes.
But yeah, tell me a little, like, are you excited? Are you nervous?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, I would lie if I say it's all like I'm very calm, and it's just exciting because it's like the thing is it has not been done before in that way, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm very confident and familiar with the consensus layer because like it's just another Tendermint chain, right? Mm-hmm. But the whole data layer and all the roll-ups on top of it, it's not been done before. So it's of course it's very exciting.
But like, yeah, how do you launch them actually now that you mention it? Like, so you start with just the L1.
Yes.
That part you're not worried about.
No.
Because that'll just be like, but it won't be connected to anything. Like there's no risk. It's just sort of like doing it. It'll have like empty blocks then?
Yeah.
There's no activity,
Initially, probably there will be activity in the sense that people will experiment with pay for blobs, and also the whole proof of stake logic also will generate transactions and stuff. Right?
Okay. And then what's next? So then you tap a few.
I think it's not us that will do like the ecosystem, and the community will launch the projects on top, right? Like it's like on Ethereum more or less, where Ethereum was launched and then people started writing smart contracts and deploying on top of Ethereum. So it's more like that than us launching chains on top directly.
But do you have any partners or any like groups that you already work with that you think, like, they're already building these things, and you sort of maybe, I imagine you put out a little bit of a call for like, we might need a settlement layer, we might need these other things, like, yeah, do you know any of those teams? Can you share who they are?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a lot already going on for a pre-launch project. I'm quite it's quite amazing to see. Like last Modular Summit, everything was like still very early, and there was like very few teams actually working on very base layer infrastructure. Now there's actually applications, cool. and there's like a few games. There is a team that's building basically an ops stack, and there's a team on top of that as like make it possible to deploy your rollup via one-click solution. There's teams like Berachain that is launching like an EVM settlement layer, and there's also Dimension that has the same. So it's like there's more and more like infrastructure, but also applications like games and cool. and DeFi and so on and so forth.
I actually want to talk to you about that, like the infrastructure period. We're still in it.
Yes.
This is infrastructure. We've spent the last 5 years at least working on this. Do you think we have it's at a state, and I'm not only talking about Celestia here, I'm actually talking about like generally, where the shift in like there maybe should be a shift in focus more towards those applications that users need?
I think
we are a very leading question I just gave you.
I think we are not fully there yet, to be honest. I think there's still need for further infrastructure, especially in the Celestia case. There still needs to be a few layers being built until application developers will have a very good time building, and the goal is that application developers can deploy their rollup or their own application chains like easier as it is today to deploy like a smart contract, essentially, right? Wow. Like that would be ideal, and I think we will get there, but it will take a little bit of time.
Okay.
Again, and then I think yes, I completely agree. There should be a shift to end user applications and end user usability, and I think before that, though, you need to wrap up that infrastructure, we need a focus on like developer usability as well. Before that, right? And then in parallel or at the end, like we need to focus a lot more on end user usability as well, because it's still too difficult to use any of the stack, in my opinion.
I have just, as you're describing this, I'm wondering, each of the rollups, like in terms of language that a developer could use, do you have to use a certain language within a rollup? Could it be like, so could you, like what, I feel like you can't put any language in there. You can just write JavaScript.
You could, I mean...
but isn't there like issues with that? Like
yes.
You need a certain kind of language.
Yeah, you need, so it's less about the language, but about the execution environment, right? Like you need, if someone provides a VM that supports like a subset of JavaScript, or like there's Agoric, for instance, right? Like
they do
Agoric's,
hardened JS.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this hardened JS, you could deploy that as a roll-up on top of Celestia, and then people could deploy their smart contracts in JavaScript as well. So it's like it's not really the language, as long as you have a VM or like a framework like the Cosmos SDK or something that can interact, where you have like a framework where you can build your application essentially.
Very cool. Well, I want to say thank you so much for this wonderful interview.
Thank you for having me again, and it's an honor that you're doing the modular radio.
Yeah, it's
awesome.
so cool to do it.
Thank you.
So yeah, and thanks for watching.
Thanks.